I know lots of people often wonder about my surname relative to that of my husband. I'm Geingos. My husband was Geinkob. And many of you who know Kwekwe Khobab speaking people, the surnames, the men's surnames end with a B to denote a male person, and the woman's surname will end with a S to denote a female. And I've always wondered about that. I think Russians have that. There's a few language groups that have this distinction in surname of gender. And I've often wondered if it's good or bad, particularly for women, because every experience people have with us is based on our gender. And if they know your gender beforehand, I'm not sure if it's always counts in your favor, but that is a cultural anomaly with my surname relative to that of what my spouse's surname would be. Thanks for an incredible introduction, Akuna, and I can only thank WomenLift for creating this safe space for women in public health. But I did notice in the comments there's engineers and people outside of the public health sector who've also joined, and I agree with their reasoning. Establishing work-life balance is an issue in every single sector. What I like is the idea of women getting together to have these conversations, because an important part of these types of networks is the need to trust one another so that we feel safe to share our successes, what's worked for us, but most importantly also to share our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, our mistakes, because sometimes sharing our mistakes is more valuable than just talking about where we've succeeded, because that helps other people not to pay the school fees we've had to pay. And as I was saying about women, particularly in the workplace, whether it's judgment around your family structures, why are you single? Why is it a woman like you is married to a man like that? Who's looking after your children? Why don't you have children? Being talked down on, being constantly interrupted when you're speaking. The focus on your appearance. You'll deliver an incredible speech, but people are just fixated on your hair or your lack of makeup or your makeup or whatever it is. And let's not forget the gendered insults, insinuations. And I've spent many hours speaking to women in all sectors. And often this casual cruelty that women in the workplace are exposed to is some of the soft issues we don't talk enough about. And probably not because they don't hurt, it's because we're just tired. And I think Akuna mentioned that there's a point where you just get tired, you just get fed up. And particularly in public health, where men continue to dominate the leadership space, we shouldn't be surprised, even though most women are healthcare workers. We shouldn't be surprised, because this is the reality at leadership levels in every sector, including politics. We still have a way to go when it comes to the issues of gender equality. I was asked to speak a little bit about my background, and in that background, I'll share some of the lessons as well. I did study law and started off in that environment, but right at the bottom of the ladder. I remember doing research. There was a very high-profile case, and that time I was working at the government attorneys, and it was a treason case, and it's been the one and only treason case that has ever been adjudicated in the country. And I was a junior researcher in the office of the government attorney. And I remember so clearly driving myself from the government attorney's office to the hospital. And within 30 minutes of driving myself to the hospital, I gave birth to my daughter, who's now 25 years old. In the first 10 years after giving birth to her, I told this as if it was a joke. I actually found it quite funny. And after a while, I realized how horrifying it is that somebody drives themselves from work straight to a hospital to give birth. And because you work on hours, within a week, I was really back at work doing that research again. And I'll come back to the point I want to make about why that's incredibly problematic, even though you don't see it as problematic when it happens, because it feels normal. It's just, a lot of it is done out of necessity. Anyway, from the government attorney, I went to the Namibian Stock Exchange and worked my way up. I became a listings executive there. So I did all of the listings on the Namibian Stock Exchange. I think I probably did about 8. From there, I headed up a corporate finance unit in a corporate finance advisory outfit that was linked to a large bank. And from there, I was able to transition into becoming a co-founding shareholder and the founding managing director of what today remains Namibia's largest private equity fund. We started up a bank ourselves. I was the chairperson, the single largest shareholder. So I built quite a portfolio of work, which I declared my assets publicly, even though I wasn't obliged to. And that was because my husband was about to become president of the country. And I just felt with all these assets and all these ownerships that I had, it's best to be transparent about what is there and what is not there. Declared assets, climbed off all of these boards and really brought a stop to my career and became First Lady. And I'll tell you why that's important is what I can tell you in the beginning of my career, when I was working at the stock exchange, when I was working at the corporate finance outfit, I didn't have the money or the agency to negotiate my working hours. People say set boundaries, say no. I didn't work in that environment where I could set boundaries with my bosses. And also the learning curve when you're at the bottom is so high, you don't necessarily want to set those boundaries. As my career advanced, by the time I was at corporate finance, I did have a little bit more discretionary spending available to me. So I could throw money at the problem. By the time I was the MD of the private equity fund, I had a great personal assistant. I had a lot of admin support. I didn't have to pick up my children from school anymore. I could hire live-in nannies. I could really throw money at the problem. I didn't have to drive around to drop off my children at sports or do any of that. But the reality is when you're at the beginning, you don't have that money. You have to do this yourself. And what's important that when you get higher up the food chain, where you can negotiate boundaries, where you can make decisions like, I'm going to stop this meeting now because I need to pick up my children from school. You enable others who don't have that negotiating power to be able to do the same. So if I stop a board meeting because I need to go fetch my child from wherever I need to go fetch my child from, there were other people, particularly women, who were also running late to fetch their children. So when I stop that meeting and say we can reconvene, I give them an opportunity to go fetch their children. But often in that boardroom, I was the only woman. The rest were men. And their wives were fetching their children from school. So I'd often make a joke, but it wasn't really a joke. I really meant it, where I said to them, I need a wife. I need somebody who picks up my children from school. So because you have wives, I don't have one. I need to go pick up my child. And that's the importance of when you do become a leader, you must set the tone of what needs to be done. Public health and the financial environment in which I worked, it's not the same, but there are similarities when you want to establish this. I'm not sure I like the word work-life balance. Personally, I don't believe it's possible. There were days I was an incredible business person, and there were days I was an incredible mom. Those days didn't often integrate. And I think we must accept that. I don't think there's work-life balance for many of us, because at the heart of establishing a work-life balance for women is really patriarchy and the gender inequality it causes. Because at home, you're expected to take care of all the household duties, including child rearing, because you're a woman. But at work, you're also expected to be more productive because you're a woman. So the balance part, I'm not so sure about. I like those who talk about integrating work with your life. It's more an integration than it is a balance. Those of you who've managed to create a balance, I envy you. I never did. It really was about just establishing an equilibrium, but also being mindful of you'll be haunted by decisions. My son is 29, my daughter's 25, my children are big. But as they become adults and they start struggling with certain things, as I don't know if it's me, but I'm hearing it from a lot of women, you start to feel guilty that are they struggling with this because I was so busy when this child was small? Is it because other moms went to their squash games and I was the mom traveling and out of the country who wasn't able to? So it is important to realize your children will grow bigger. There are things in life that they'll struggle with. And sometimes they'll even blame you. It's because you were so busy. It's because you were never there. So when you do these trade-offs early on, think about what it may cost you, because I think as beings, women, we tend to blame ourselves for whatever goes wrong in children's lives. So just really think about that. How will this feel 20, 30 years from now when these ones are adults? I also just want to veer off with a quick story as well, where we must be true to ourselves. When I was running the private equity fund, I was able to take a 3-month sabbatical. And the first month, I decided to spend it on myself. I traveled overseas. The second month, I was at home. I was being a mom. I took my kids to school. I collected them. I checked their homework. And then in the third month, we went to travel. The month that my children hated the most of my sabbatical was the second month where I was a stay-at-home mom. Within 3 days, these kids could not wait for me to go back to work because they had become independent little beings, and I was irritating the hell out of them, hovering over them like that. And so you must be true to yourself as well. And I also got frustrated after 2 weeks. I got bored. We were all agitated with each other after 2 weeks. And that's why we must be true to ourselves as well. I have incredible respect for women who are at home and who look after their kids. I think that's for them, but it's not for all of us. I have incredible women who choose to work, many of us out of necessity. And that's for us. And we shouldn't judge each other in terms of the decisions we take about being a stay-at-home mom or working high-pressure, stressful jobs. Because I used to sometimes feel judged by women who had the luxury of staying at home to look after their kids. I didn't have that luxury. I didn't have anybody paying my bills. I had to pay my own bills. So I was also true to myself. So the kids and I decided next sabbatical, none of that stay-at-home mom stuff. We must be true to each other. There's decisions that will haunt you, particularly those of you in public health. If I made a bad investment, nobody died. Nobody's health deteriorated. None of my decisions were life or death. It was either good capital returns or it was poor capital returns, but you could always recover from that. So whatever pressure I felt, none of my decisions really changed the trajectory of anybody's lives. Public health is different. It does. You literally make life or death decisions. So your ability to be in the right frame of mind at all times to make the right decision is more important than in most sectors. I also never really had public interface. And I know some of you, even though you're in public health, you don't either, but some of you do. And the public is a reflection of our society. So there'll be abusive behavior that you will be subjected to. There'll be cases that are emotional that you'll take home and think about, and that will cause you a little bit of emotional discomfort as well. So I do recognize that there are similarities in what we need to establish, but there's also very clear differences depending on the sector that you operate in. So when we're talking about redefining this work, this integration of our work with our lives, I think it starts and stops with really what we do, or what WomenLift Health is trying to do, and that's to establish female leaders at the top. Because we do need to change the policies in our organizations, but also the legislative policies that specifically look at issues that women uniquely face. These are issues around childcare, these are issues around addressing systemic inequalities, and also holding power structures accountable. And the people who can do that are the people who relate to these problems, and that's women. And I'm not saying all women, because there are women who find themselves at the top of organizations and are not very helpful towards other women. I'm not talking about those anomalies. I'm talking about the principle that the importance here, if we want to redefine, is policy reforms. And policy reforms can only be pushed by those who understand what the issue is. And understanding the issue is really determined by a lived experience. The other thing I want to talk about, if you want to redefine work-life balance, and I know now I speak from a position of privilege, but 25 years ago, I didn't. And the one thing that did impact my ability to integrate my work with my personal life was personal finances. There wasn't much to go with. So being overworked, but also underpaid, it does impact your ability to integrate your work and your life, because you don't have the money to spend you can spend on childcare, but you can't pay the kind of salaries that gets you the best possible childcare. You can't pay somebody to come and drop your children up and down. And that's why there needs to be policy support on issues around childcare, on issues around the basic structure that you need. I'm also mindful of women in high pressure jobs and its impact on our relationships with those we love, particularly your spouse. It could be a boyfriend or a husband. I know many, many women with high pressure jobs who are single or whose relationships disintegrated. And mind you, I'm one of those women. I had incredible relationship. The kids loved their dad, but our relationship didn't survive the pressure of both our jobs. There was nothing else wrong. It was really the pressure of both our jobs. I think maybe we were too young. I'm not making any other excuses, but I think it was really the pressure of the environment that I operated in. And things happen as they are. But if there's advice I can give to, particularly to the younger woman, is protect your relationships, whether it's making sure you get to your parents, making time for your children. If you are married or plan to get married, protect your relationship at all costs. And I pause before I say this. And I know some of you may not agree, but I do believe that the key to a balance of sort, especially in the beginning of your career, is probably not being too distracted in a relationship, because I don't know how people manage both when you're working long hours, when you need to be all over the place, you're flying here, you're flying there. And if you can manage it, it's because you have a partner who has very little insecurities and who is supportive. Trying to balance a high-pressure job with a needy, insecure partner is close to impossible. And something will give. If it's not of you, it's of your relationship or of your work. So the single most important decision that you're going to make about whether you're going to integrate your work with your life is who you choose to be with in terms of a partner. That person must be supportive. Otherwise, everything else I'll tell you is not going to matter. If there's war at home, you'll never be able to operate in peace at work, because the two will bleed into each other. So your support system is very, very important. So we've talked about the relationships at home having an impact on your work life, but your relationship inside the workplace are also important. And you must never become too busy that you can't do effective networking and relationship building within an organization. Gossiping about how bad everybody is not building networks and relationships. It's probably what you want to stay away from, these cliques, these little things that we sometimes do in workplaces. But building real networks, where when there is disagreement in the workplace, when you do want to propose a policy, those above you or your colleagues trust your judgment. And they believe that if you say something, it's because you're sincere, you mean it, you understand what you're talking about. So really building relationships in an organization where you are perceived and viewed as somebody who exercises good judgment and who is trustworthy. And that way, when you speak about uncomfortable decisions or policies that others may disagree with, you've built a credible voice within your own organization. I've talked about children, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I don't want to talk about the normal things that people talk about in these conversations. I'm sure you've heard all of them. But I do want to talk about sexual harassment, because I don't think we talk about that enough. The environment I worked in was very male-dominated. And there was enough inappropriate remarks. There was enough, I wouldn't call it sexual harassment, but I would call it really men who would overstep their boundaries. And we often, especially in a power dynamic, where you are not the one where the power resides, you need to be so careful with how you address that. But you must address that. And it's also, it must happen from the top. Sexual harassment in the workplace is not taken seriously. And it does affect women's ability to manage the dynamic of work and home. And God forbid you have a spouse who's jealous and there are people in your workplace who overstep boundaries, it just makes for a toxic combination. But I don't believe any woman should be subjected to that in the workplace. We really do need to move away from that. I'm going to wrap up because I want to leave space for question and answers. So I think some of the questions that you may have might cover the things that I would have wanted to talk about. But I just want to address a last point. And that's how in every meeting I went to, I would be the only woman. And people would want coffee and they would need somebody to take minutes. Till today, I don't drink coffee. And the reason I don't drink coffee is I realized quickly, if I told people in the boardroom that, no, I don't drink coffee. I can't make anybody coffee. I make the most horrible coffee in the world. So they made their own coffee. But I didn't make it an issue. I could have rather said, you go to hell. I'm not here to make your coffee. I could have said that because that's what I was thinking. But I made it almost a joke, and I made it about my inability to make coffee because I was sure as hell not going to make coffee for people who should be my counterparts. The second boundary I used to do on administrative tasks is if people asked me to take minutes, and I took incredibly good minutes, I again always declined because I just felt if I'm sitting in a meeting taking minutes, how do I contribute strategically? So try and set boundaries on administrative tasks that are not yours, but which tend to be gendered. And find a way around getting out of the gender discussion, but not doing that administrative task. Because we find ourselves as women often in the workplace being dumped with tasks that are administrative in nature, but which you are supposed to do well simply because you're a woman. So I'm skipping a lot of my presentation. We're running out of time, but I really want to end with how we started. And that is to say, I don't think there's work-life balance. I'd love for you on the call to share with me the times that you felt you did have work-life balance all the time. I do think it's about equilibrium. If there were days where I really had to focus on my kids, and there were days I really had to focus on my career, and to an extent kind of neglected children, as long as there was an equilibrium over time, I would be happy. So to me, it really is about integrating work into life. I want to stop there, Kuna, and just enable the question and answer session before we totally run out of time.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Monica Geingos. That was absolutely incredible. And thanks so much for being vulnerable with us. I think, for time and ensuring that everyone does have a voice, I'm going to take it straight to our room and find out if we have any questions. So if we do have any questions, please just by a show of hands. Mrs. Monica is here for that reason. So in the Power Up, one of the things that was reflected on, a lot of women felt that societal expectations and personal biases influence or have influenced how they prioritize between work and life balance. Could you please share any societal expectations and personal biases that you may have experienced that impacted on how you managed to then integrate work and life?
So I can be a bit opinionated about things, whether when I was a First Lady, but even when I was a leader in the private sector, I could be very opinionated about things. And one thing I did notice about being opinionated, especially publicly, is there's nothing some people in society wanted more than for me just to shut up. And they literally said that, just shut up. Like, why are you not in the kitchen? And being able to absorb these gendered insults, because they would really come for you, was quite difficult for me. A second thing I had to navigate very carefully is I was in the work of building relationships where I could find equity investments. So I had to take people out to lunch. I had to do events. And every fourth month, you deal with an accusation, you're sleeping with X, you've done this with Y. And that would get home. And you'd need to defend yourself at home and say, I know this is a story, but it's not true. So the societal expectations also often ended up in gossip where you had to defend yourself at home. And then the third one I want to just quickly touch on is being a female breadwinner, where it's one of the hardest things to be. And things that shouldn't become things become things. Discussions that shouldn't even be a discussion becomes a discussion. So if your husband earns more than you do and he wants to give money to his family for whatever reason that you may not agree with, and you say, no, that's not the right reason. We can't do that. it kind of just becomes a discussion about whether this should be money that he should be spending or not. But say now your husband earns less than you, or maybe doesn't work, but there's a need in his family. It could be a funeral, it could be a wedding, they could need to be putting gates up at the village house, it could be anything, but you are the breadwinner. But you believe that it's not necessary. The discussion is not about the funeral, it's not about the gate, is it because it's your money that you feel you can just make decisions? So the dynamic that's created for female breadwinners is incredibly difficult. But you also need a lot of wisdom and judgment in how you as a female breadwinner deal with that dynamic. The day you become angry and you start speaking about it's my house, it's my car, you lack wisdom. You must be sensitive to these issues in all their manifestations. And there's sometimes you must agree with things that you don't necessarily agree with to avoid that being thrown in your face. But that is a dynamic for women who earn a little bit more. And the reason it's a dynamic is because of societal expectations that men should earn more than women. Their careers should be shinier than yours. And that's not always true. And for many of you, if it's not true now, it has the potential to become true later. And that's a dynamic that you must manage very carefully.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Mrs. Geingos. We do have some hands up. The first one is Himizembi PT. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Please come through. And then we'll be followed by Shiwa Osetu.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for the chance to ask a question. Good morning, Mrs. Geingos. My question is, I am 25. I'm in the entry level, but I'm also in a male-dominated field, but on the side also studying, but also facing black text and also trying to set boundaries within a family that I'm juggling the black text, my life as a young lady, but also juggling this career that's male dominated as a train driver and also trying to study. So what advice could you give me to just, how do I steer everything? I have been steering it, yes, but the beginning is so difficult. Like, how do you manage on days where you just feel like there's enough? Thank you very much.
Can you just quickly come back there? Was the question about black tax or the question about when things just become too much?
Black tax and then entry level on juggling. How does one face, how do you juggle everything in the beginning at the entry level?
Yeah. So the black tax one, I think as Africans, the black tax is built in. I'm named after my grandmother, and my mom basically gave me to my grandmother when I was born because my brother was 1 year old. My mom was a nurse who was working from 9 to 9. So my mom left me with my grandmother in the north of the country while she was working in the south of the country with the rest of the family. And I stayed with my grandmother for about 3 years. And is that not a black tax? So the way our structures as families on this continent are structured, black tax might be the wrong word. I like, maybe Ubuntu is the better word. I'm a first degree earner in my house. And I till today, I look after my parents and a large portion of my family. And I've learned, initially there was a time I was becoming almost resentful at the expectations and the demands, some of which I felt were a little bit abusive or unreasonable, a little bit of entitlement. But there was a point where I sat down and thought to myself, in every family, the Lord blesses one, not because of you're a great individual, but because the Lord has decided you are the vessel. And the blessings that come to you are actually not yours. It's you are meant to be a vessel. And if you start looking at black tax as a burden, you're not appreciating the level of blessing and why that blessing is there. It's because you're a vessel. It's for you to make sure that others are okay. And it's unfortunate, but it's what it is. And I think we block our blessings when we don't want to do what we have to do with our families. But we must also build the wisdom to know when it's manipulation. I love to tell my family, I love expensive handbags, but I walk past those expensive shops every day because I don't want to waste money. So I am quite good at wasting my own money. I do not need to outsource it to you. I'm not going to give you money if you're going to waste it. So we must hold our families accountable, because if we don't hold them accountable, we become resentful. And sometimes there's some requests you must say no to, no matter how angry they become with you. So I think it's just reshaping how you think about black tax and doing what is within your means. Don't spend on what you can't give. If you can only give 100, only give 100. If you can only give 200, only give 200. Don't give beyond your means and don't borrow your family money. You know you're not going to get it back. All it's going to do is cause drama in the house. The question about starting right at the beginning. I feel trauma when I think about my beginning, because you've got no negotiating power. And that, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't see it in any other way. And I don't know how old you are, because I do see there's a difference in generations in how we look at this. If I look at the generation of my children, all my kids, including my husband's kids, are between 25, the youngest is 25, to 40. The 20-year-olds to 30-year-olds, they're very much about boundaries. I'm only going to work these kind of hours. You can't call me after hours. My weekends are mine. I'm intrigued because I didn't feel in the beginning of my career I had that negotiating power. But I didn't see a problem with working a little bit harder in the beginning of my career. And I feel that's what set me up for where I am today. That's your beginning of the career is when you build work ethic. Now, towards the end of my career, I had more work-life balance because there wasn't that much donkey work to do, if I must be disrespectful about it. So I had more work-life career. I didn't have to work the kind of hours I used to work in the beginning. So I found those kind of hours in the beginning almost as the foundation of setting me up for the career that I went to enjoy, because I built a reputation of being somebody who could deliver on deadlines, who could take pressure, who was resilient. So all I can tell you is work as hard as you can. And there are sacrifices to be made in the beginning of your career, but don't let yourself be abused, and don't be shy in the negotiations of your remuneration. I worked very hard, but I was never shy about what I believed my bonus should be or what I believe my salary should be.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Monica Geingos. Shiwa, I'm going to hand over to you, and then we will take a question from Dr. Safraz. I hope I'm saying your names correctly. Shiwa?
Good afternoon, Ms. Monica Geingos. My name is Shiwashetu Mukete, and I'm a second-year medical student at the University of Namibia, headed to third year. My question is, how can young professionals effectively build networks that support both career growth and personal well-being? And also, what advice do you have for young women aspiring leadership roles in healthcare and public health from while we're still in training?
Yeah. So Shiwa, when you're talking, I was thinking recently in Namibia, there was a march about last week or 2 weeks ago by medical interns. And you'll be a medical intern soon. And they were complaining about having to work often shifts of longer than 24 hours. They get paid an incredibly low amount of money. I think we're in Southern Africa, so we all know what the equivalent of 2,000 to 3,000 rands is. That's what they were being paid, and how they were starting to become mentally burnt out and physically burnt out because of this. And they took the agency, it's election time, and they took that moment to say, we're not going to do this. And I felt a little bit of pride in them for setting some boundaries, because I can't imagine what it means to work more than 24 hours on a regular basis and expect to be normal. And I know it's not your thing, Shiwa, but when you spoke, it did make me think about that. But the question about building a career in public health and also building the relationship, the networks, I think your first privilege, which many people don't have, is to be able to study in the country where you are likely to ply your trade. Because the networks that you're building now, you're going to build into the regulators, you're going to bump into your ministers of health, you're going to bump into your technocrats in the ministries, you're going to bump into the people who work at the UNAIDS and the UNFPA and all the public health professionals as a student. Your lecturers will know you, and they've got incredible networks as well. You can plug into conversations like this virtually or in person. So I think that's a great one, but not everybody has that ability. So I think these kind of virtual conversations is important. You'll be surprised, Shiwa, especially in all leadership spaces, including public health, how small the pool of female leaders are and how integrated it is. If you contact me and you want to make contact with, I don't know, Dr. Moeti from WHO, I will be able to put you in touch. That network is very small. Just on this call, I'm sure there's doctors and all kinds of healthcare professionals whose networks will link you to the person that you need. So it is important to be part of networks like this, to attend events, be part of these type of conversations. It's easy and it's important to build a network, but also, Shiwa, become a thought leader. Next year, write an article on an issue around public health, and people will read it. The internet is such that they'll read it outside of Namibia. So when people see that, they'll remember the name Shiwa Shetu.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
That is incredible. All the best with your studies, Shiwa. Dr. Safraz, please come in.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been such a pleasure listening to you. One question that I'm tempted to ask, although you've given several clues, I must say, is that as you reflect back, what do you think is the topmost, factor that helped you in getting to where you are today? And also, what is it that you feel that if you would have done differently as you reflect back on the years and on your journey? And that is some sort of an advice that you're giving to the audience who are here today. So I'll just pause here.
Yeah. So the one factor that I think helped me a lot, and again, I'm reluctant to say it because it's not something everybody has, and it was nothing I did to have it, is I think I was helped a lot by confidence. Like, I really believe in myself. And if I didn't, there's just too many opportunities for people to convince you that you're not going to amount to much, or that this is just too much for me to overcome. And what I then always say to people is, we must, for us, often it's too late, but you can build confidence later in life. My confidence was protected growing up. I do have childhood trauma, but it's stuff that I can work through. It's not traumatic for me to go back into my childhood with an adult mind. But if it is for you and it affects your confidence, please go and get that trauma unpacked, because it does affect your ability to be resilient in places which are very triggering and where you are required to have high levels of emotional intelligence. Another thing about my confidence that survived is, sometimes even in our friendship groups, whether it's our families, whether it's our partners, we surround ourselves sometimes with people who impact our confidence. And to really look at the people who make you feel a bit smaller and ask yourself, what measures can you put in place for this person to have less of an impact on you? It could be your mom who makes weird comments. It could be your boyfriend who just doesn't think that you're going to be what you think you're going to be, or people who just think you're too ambitious. Evaluate your circles very carefully about people who affect how you feel about yourself. And then the things that what is it that I learned or regret or would do differently? I would probably have been, we're not allowed to be ambitious as women, nor are we allowed to be not demanding, but a little bit more focused on the money. We're very much about the experience and doing everything that we can do. And we're very shy to talk about our financial circumstances and our expectations. And as I grew in the food chain, I realized, because I became the person that people negotiated their remuneration with. And I realized and not everybody, if like in government, you can't negotiate remuneration in government. But there is a time where you must start thinking about the money. It's not a scandal. It doesn't make you a person who likes money. But we must start thinking about our career advancement paths a lot earlier in the organization. That I would have gotten my wish, but I was always reluctant. I always felt, well, you can see my value. You didn't offer to me, and I'll be angry for the next 3 months. I'm still working hard, but I'm angry that I didn't get the raise that I thought I should get. But I never really advocated for myself around remuneration.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
That is so powerful, Mrs. Geingos. I'm going to take the last question, Louise Iyambo, and then we will hand over back to Akona, who'll do our closing.
Madam Geingos, how are you?
I'm good, Louise. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. My name is Louise, and I'm a medical doctor at an entry level. I just have a question. What would you advise in a situation whereby you are already in a male-dominated field, and unfortunately what your degree has done, it's as if it has pushed people away? Yeah, your friends that you had prior to acquiring this degree has kind of, you don't know whether they fear relating with you. And what would you advise? How would you reconnect back to these friends, or how would you connect with new friends?
Yeah. Louise, it sounds like an easy question, but it's not. I also went through a phase where people were saying I've changed. And In some ways I did. When you do finish your qualifications, when you do move into a certain income bracket, there will be feedback about who you've become by those who know you. And you must listen carefully to that feedback, because sometimes we do change without realizing it. But often with me, for instance, I became busy. So I wasn't always plugged in with what was happening in my friendship groups, for instance. I missed birthday parties. I missed the gossip. And the times when I did come, I was out of the loop, so I'd be a little bit quieter, or I didn't enjoy the conversation all the time. So accept that you probably have changed a little bit. Your focus has changed. You're probably not as available as you used to be. But also be mindful that sometimes our friends also want to keep us where we used to be 10, 15 years ago. The conversation I enjoyed 15 years ago is not the conversation I enjoy today. So you will have different friendships where you get different things from. I've got a friend, we were together in kindergarten. I adore her. Actually, she's my sister. But I have another friend who I just met 5 years ago, but we connect more in terms of things that I'm interested in now. So we accept that you're going to have different kinds of friendships at different levels. Be conscious of changing to the point where you become unrecognizable even to yourself. But keep friends who tell you the truth. Throughout my time, even as First Lady, there's many people who became very friendly to me, but I never really regarded them as friends. The people I regarded as friends are the people I've always had as friends throughout my life, because they didn't fear me. They didn't for a second hesitate. Even when I was in the private sector and quite high, they never hesitated if I spoke to them in a certain way to tell me, that was rude. Don't speak to me like that. And you need people like that. You need people around you who have the authority in your life to call you back to order when you're acting up, or where you say something that's just so out of touch with reality. And they'll tell you, well, maybe it's okay to say that with me, but don't say that again with people who don't know you. It sounds kind of stupid. So you do need friends who you trust, who can bring you the right way, but be careful of people who try to make you smaller. And sometimes there are people in our friendship circles who try and do that.